Hello everybody, it's Melly here, and today I'm just going to do a quick tutorial on how to attach heads using ladder stitch. For the purposes of this tutorial, I'm actually doing it for the Lovey Love pattern, which is my newly released Lovey Cuddle Pal pattern, which is just absolutely gorgeous. And for this pattern, we do actually attach the head to the body of the Lovey using hand ladder stitch. Now, I know that some people aren't too familiar with ladder stitch and would like a few little tips and tricks along the way, so follow along and hopefully this will really help you. Now, this method can be used for any of the patterns where you're attaching heads or limbs using ladder stitch. It's obviously not only specific to this pattern. However, do bear in mind that often with the other patterns you might be dealing with more of a solid stuffed base and a stuffed head that you're attaching, whereas in this pattern we actually have, you know, a sort of a loose fabric that we're attaching to the head. So, you know, a few little differences, but basically the technique is exactly the same. So first of all, I just wanted to show you that if you are doing the Lovey Love pattern, please note that at this step your face will not be embroidered as yet. This one is because it's the one that I used to make the photograph steps within the pattern, and I've actually just removed his head now to be able to show you this technique. So this was a completed toy that I've just kind of pulled apart. So yours won't have its nose and eyes on it at this stage, so please don't look at that and worry that you've missed a step. But when you get to this step, you will have a fully stuffed head. So you'll see how this head is stuffed really, really firmly. It is something that I suggest in the pattern that if you think you've finished stuffing, just keep stuffing. And I really mean that. You do want this shape to be fully filled out, and you want this to be really, really nice and bursting. The reason is that it's you're going to get a much better attachment to your body if this is nice and firm, and also you're not going to get any sort of puckering because the shape is fully filled out. Of course, completely up to you. Some people do like things to be softer and less filled, but just as a warning that if you do that, your join may not be quite as neat and quite as strong, but otherwise it's all good. Okay, so firstly what we're going to do is get a length of polyester thread. Now, I have mentioned in the pattern that polyester thread is a crucial thing, and I really mean that it is a crucial thing. If you were to use cotton thread for this step to attach the body to the head, you would find that you are not going to get a tight join. It's probably going to snap as you're working on it. And also later on, obviously, this is going to be played with, hopefully, and loved on by a little child. And you really need that strength in order to do this. So please ensure that you are using only polyester thread. If you have a thread you want to use and you are not quite sure if it is cotton or polyester because it is unwrapped, just grab a length and try and snap it. If you can snap it easily, it's going to be cotton. If you, in order to snap it, need to almost, you know, make lines and dig into your skin and it's really quite tough to snap, then it most likely is polyester. So that would be a good one to work with. So here I've got a double length that's been threaded onto my needle, and as you can see there, I have tied a knot to the end. I have a good decent length here, so I'm going to suggest that I have probably about 30 inches in length, doubled obviously. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by taking my first stitch into the body. Now with this one it's quite easy, we don't need to sink that knot because obviously we have the wrong side of the neck in here. So we can just take a stitch from the inside with our knot out to the front. Now I'm taking that first stitch in the very centre of my front. So you can basically just eyeball that in between your two arms and take your first stitch in there. And as you'll see, I'm working probably around, you know, 1/4 of an inch from that top raw edge of the neckline. Once I've taken that first stitch into the centre part of my body, I'm going to take my first stitch into the centre part of my head front. Okay, so basically that's very easy to detect because we've got that front seam coming down here. So I'm going to take just a first little running stitch, again approximately 1/4 of an inch up from the raw edge, and it's just a horizontal running stitch that I'm taking. Okay, so now you'll see how I have basically attached the body and the head in a very loose fashion at this stage, but we'll continue on. So where that now comes out, that stitch comes out of my head, I'm going to kind of position my thread, going downwards towards the body again. And that sort of distance that we have with those two pieces of thread being parallel, that's about where I'm going to take my second stitch into the body. Now, of course, this body is gathered and it is minky, so it is very forgiving. So you don't have to be too perfect with those ones in the minky. But as you can see, I'm just going to take another horizontal running stitch. I'm not going to pull it all the way there yet, but you'll see how I'm starting to get what is considered like the rungs of a ladder, which is why this is called ladder stitch. With your stitches, you are creating what looks like rungs of a ladder. So basically, the technical side of it is that where this stitch exits, parallel to that, but in line with that is where your running stitch for the second part is going to begin. Where this one exits here, in line with that, we enter into the head. And we just continue around the body in the same sort of fashion. So this first way around, you probably don't need to be too small with your stitches. You could do it bigger than what I'm doing here, but I'm just trying to do this to demonstrate. So you'll see once we've gotten probably, I don't know, as you can see here, we've got about 5 rungs of our ladder, 5 stitches in place. Once you get to an area like that, you can actually pull them tight and secure that. Now, always pull the thread the direction that your stitches have just come out, okay? So that running stitch has just gone that way. So I'm going to pull my thread along with that last stitch that I've taken. And we pull that, and you'll see that as I pull that, those rungs of the ladder come in, and I'm hoping that you can see it there. Obviously, we're not to the point where we're completed this toy, but you'll see how already, even though we're just doing the basic first way around, you're not seeing those stitches. That's the beauty of ladder stitch. It kind of creates this real seamless attachment there. So we've pulled those tight. Now we're just going to continue along and do the same thing. What you can do is that you can kind of gauge as you're going where you want things to join on your body and your head. So we're going to see that this arm is here. We probably want this arm to be centered in the side of the head so that the arms are going to the side of our lovey. So you can kind of just manipulate what's happening. So if I take a stitch in the head, now I want to start doing the arm because I want that to be at that position. I can take a stitch into the arm. As I mentioned before, the stitches don't have to be tiny at this stage. The first circle around, we are basically just attaching the two parts, securing them together. So I've done a few more stitches. I'm just going to pull that nice and taut. Don't worry, as you continue to work, it is going to loosen again, but if you keep pulling it taut sort of every few ladder stitches, it just helps along the way. Otherwise, it's very hard to kind of pull the whole circle of stitching tight later. It just, isn't going to work. So as you can see again, after a few stitches, I'm just going to pull on that thread. So basically, we're just going to continue around. We keep taking a stitch about 1/4 of an inch down from the lovey body neckline, and then another stitch into the head. Okay, a little bit of fluff there. That's all good. Again, pull my ladder stitches tight. Now you can see we're working around. Again, I want to kind of eyeball and say, look, we want the center of this body back to be at the center of the head back. So I'm going in a good way here. We can see that that's kind of already naturally happening by the way I'm taking my stitches. I'm going to take a final stitch into the arm section of the body there, and a stitch into the head. Now this bit, obviously can be a little bit laborious. We're just doing hand stitching, which I know is usually nobody's favourite. But, it is the best way to get this really beautiful round head finish onto a body. Of course, we could have sewn the body to the head before stuffing, made it a much nicer sewing project, or a lot simpler or quicker sewing project. But, I really am all for the beautiful finish. And to get the beautiful finish of this lovey with the nice round head and the beautiful gathered body kind of coming from that, ladder stitch really is the only option to get that beautiful kind of finish. I always say to people that, I know I do a lot of hand sewing at the end of my projects, especially with face features and things like that. The main reason I do these sort of hand work pieces at the end of my jobs is because it's the only way you can kind of get that real precision in respect to location, but also in respect to like personality and expression in your toys. For instance, with this guy, if we were to sew his eyes and nose into place before we sewed him together and stuffed him, you would find that the position of his eyes and nose would change dramatically, depending on how heavily you stuffed, depending on the fabric you used and how much stretch is in that fabric. You really can't control the end result very well if you sew those before you stuff. Anytime you sew something by hand afterwards, you can control exactly where that item is going, and you can also control sort of personality and trial things, and look at how the eyes might look, if they're in line with the nose, if they're slightly above the nose, if they're slightly below the nose. Now I just want to show you so far what we've done. So I've just been pulling as I go along, and hopefully you've been watching along and seeing how simple it really is. You're just taking one running stitch into the body. Again, I'm up to the arm, so it gets a little bit thick at this point. One running stitch into the body, one running stitch into the head, one running stitch into the body. And again, as I've mentioned, this is the first go around. We are going to go around 2 to 3 times to make sure that this is a really secure join. The first one, really, I mean, it's the tighter you can pull it and the nicer you can get that finish, the better, because obviously it just builds the foundation. But really at this point, the most important thing is that we're just getting a good even join around the circle. Then our next 2 rows are going to be more about really strengthening and tightening that bond, and also sort of perfecting any bits that need perfecting. So we're pretty much almost back to our starting point, which is great. I just took one in the arm, didn't I? So one in the body, head. Then we're coming to this part of the neckline. We've almost finished our first go around. I hope you are seeing this well. It's always hard to tell when you're doing a video how clear it is, but I'm hoping it's really clear for you. Okay, so you'll see now that we are back to our starting point. Now I've been pulling tight sort of every 3 or 4 stitches, so you'll see how the join is already quite lovely. But obviously at this point we've only gone around once. It's not going to be very strong, and also it can get a whole lot tighter. As I mentioned before, we want to think about the fact that this is going to be played with by a young child, and also possibly going to be needed to be washed, things like that. So we need to make sure this is a really, really strong join. Okay, so now we're going to go around for the second go. Now, on the first round, I sort of mentioned that after every 3 or 4 stitches, we would then pull them taut. This second go around, we're going to pull every single stitch taut. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go slightly above where we've been stitching, okay? And I'm going to take the first stitch into the head. Okay, now once I've taken that stitch, I'm going to pull it nice and taut. I'm going to take my next stitch into the body. Again, we're just working slightly outside of where we just stitched, so just ever so slightly out, and then I'm going to pull that nice and taut. Where that's come out, we're taking our next stitch into the head. Again, nice and taut. Next stitch into the body, nice and taut. It is polyester thread, so please don't be scared that you're going to break this. We've got a double thickness of polyester thread, so you really can kind of pull and yank on that nice and hard. Again, next body stitch, next head stitch. Okay, pulling. Once you've been doing this a little while, it just becomes second nature. That sort of pulling manoeuvre has just become part of my stitch movement, that I take one stitch and I pull it with my finger as part of the pulling my stitch through movement. Now, as I mentioned, we're going around here now for our second round. I often do like to do a third round, especially if, you know, as I said, it's something like this that's going to be played with little hands. We want to make sure it's safe. We want to make sure that, you know, the child's not going to be able to pull it apart, that we're not going to start seeing little bits of stuffing coming out. We just want to make sure it's a really, really nice join. This second go around is also pulling those threads so much tighter. So I don't know if we can see this close up, but I would challenge you to be able to see those stitches. It really gives that beautiful seamless join. I can still sort of see the first row of stitches because I didn't do those quite as tight, but then when you look to this side, you cannot see the second row of stitches. So it really is getting that join a lot more secure. And obviously also because we're moving out by probably only a millimetre or so from the first line of stitching, it's already kind of held in place by that first row, and this second row is just able to just really get nice and tight and create a really good bond. So nearly gone around for my second row. As I mentioned before, I do suggest that, especially if you're new to a ladder stitch and you're a little bit concerned about how tight and strong you can be with your thread and your join, then I definitely recommend you go around for a third time. For the point of this tutorial, I'm just going to go around twice so that I can show you how to finish it off and you don't have to sit there watching through me doing a third row. So we've nearly finished the second row. Now this is where I was mentioning if the head wasn't stuffed quite so tautly, we'd probably be getting, you can see actually one little slight pucker there. I think that might be the only area I've got a pucker, but you would just get more of that puckering in the head if it wasn't as firmly stuffed. Okay, so I've gone around 2 times fully. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to show you how we finish off. Anytime you do hand sewing on a toy, so this is in this case to be sewing the body to the head, but also when you're doing your eyes and your nose later, or just doing any finishing touches onto a toy that's stuffed. Obviously, we do not want to create a knot on the outside. Potentially that could be broken, potentially that's just going to be, you know, ugly. You know, for whatever reasons, we do not want a knot showing. So I'm just going to show you here how we sink a knot into the toy. What we do is, obviously this is now coming nicely out of the body. I might just take a last stitch into the head. Okay, I would suggest in this case where the body is loose and the head is stuffed. Sorry, I don't know what happened there. I got a little bit of a knot in my thread, but it's come through. Yeah, but sink your knots into an area that is stuffed and stuffed nice and firmly. So at the moment I've put that back through the head. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a double knot close to where that thread is exiting. Now I don't want it exactly where the thread's exiting. I wanted it probably about a couple of millimetres away from where the thread is ending. So I'm going to show you there. I hope that you can see it in the close-up. You can see there how I have a knot that's probably 1 or 2 millimetres away from where the thread is coming out of the head. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a stitch very close to where I am there. Not exactly the same position, but, you know, maybe just slightly, like less than a millimetre away. Then take your needle out at another point. You can see how my needle is just coming out. Again, close to the join, but about, you know, a centimetre or more across. I'm going to take that thread through. It's going to stop at the knot. Now what we're going to do is we're going to do a little bit of a hard yank. Whoop, I don't know if you heard that click. I hope you did. But that click was that knot. You can see how I can't see it now. That knot just sunk in to the head. Okay, so now where I am here, I'm going to do the exact same thing. Double knot. Probably don't have to be quite as close now. You can probably even go a little bit further away from down your thread. Again, I'm going to create a double knot. Okay, So hopefully you can see that there. A nice double knot. This one's probably 1/2 centimetre away. Again, I'm going to take another little stitch into the head, bring it out anywhere else. Wait till the knot pulls. I'm hoping you can hear it this time. I'm going to pull. Whoop. If you heard that noise, that was that knot just clicking into the head. I'm going to do this a few times. The reason I do this a few times is if you've only done this once, look, it is possible that that knot will come through at some point, especially when we're dealing with washing the toy, things like that. You know, you never know when these knots are going to kind of come apart. So one might come apart, but if we have about 4 or 5 different lengths of thread with knots sunk into the toy, look, the chances of all of those coming through is very, very slim. So that join's going to stay together. You don't have sort of that fear of one knot coming apart or breaking back through the fabric, and then, you know, the toy coming apart. We really don't want that. So I'm going to just make this my last one. Again, I'm just getting the thread through anywhere. I am waiting for that knot to catch. Then I am pulling to sink that knot. Okay, so you can look around just to always make sure each one has sunk properly after you've done it. Now that's all nice and through, and then I am just going to cut that thread just against the skin there, against the skin of the toy. And there we are. We now have our head beautifully attached to our toy. This is so strong. As you can see, I'm yanking on this way harder than any baby's ever going to do, because of the polyester thread, the beautiful strength of your stuffed head. Look, you know, if you do a 3rd row, it's going to be even tighter than that. It is tighter than what the sewing machine's really going to sew it, because we've done a double thickness of thread. We've probably gone around 3 times and pulling nice and tightly. So that union is just really beautiful and strong. And yeah, that's how you attach heads to your toys using ladder stitch. Have a great day.